Hello there, this is Boss of Nigeria, Abuja. Here with me is Right Honorable Sam Onibo. We'll be looking at issues surrounding climate change in Nigeria. Honorable, you're welcome.
Thank you very
We'll go
much.
straight to the point. This concept called climate change, what's it all about?
Well, climate change actually talks about the alteration of the weather pattern over a period of time, prolonged period of time actually, that results in change in terms of how the weather is supposed to perform, whether you're talking about the heat wave or you're talking about the what used to be the rainy season that could be predicted, but it's no longer that way. Or you talk about the flood, you talk about changes that ultimately, eventually affect human beings. But it should be noted that it is the activities of human beings, burning of fossil fuels like coal, oil, gas, when we talk about greenhouse gas effect, these are the things that now alter the activities. I can give you a very good example why it is negative. If you use the small generator that we call I better pass my neighbor, you know, and the fumes coming from that place, if it's not controlled, even in when people use it, we remember the number of persons, it has killed so many people. So that negative impact, that poisonous impact, when it gets into the atmosphere, it also affects it. The way you see it kill people is the way it creates problems in the air. So that we are using very close example that that we're talking about burning of fossil fuel, how it used to, how it's capable of altering or the weather pattern and the negative impact, and eventually you see altered processes. Whether you're talking about, I've talked about rainfall and all this is. So in short, that is what climate change is. This change in pattern over a long period of time that has negative effects. If you're talking about agriculture, you're talking about production, you're talking about desertification, you're talking about flood, all these things come after change in the climate.
Okay, in a wider conversation, what's the global climate change agenda?
Well, the global climate change agenda is to ensure that we return to the pre-industrial era where the temperature is maybe within 1.5. We are working to ensure that the temperature does not exceed between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. Because as the temperature rises, so it begins to affect, like I explained. You see the desertification racing down, you see flood, you see, increase in sea level and all that. So the global agenda is to control this, and not to allow it to go, uncontrollably, because we have seen that the effects are very far-reaching. So the world got together, beginning from, we can just go back to 1992, when I've told some of my friends that when I met with General Kenwachukwu, he said he was the one who signed on behalf of Nigeria, because that's what we call the Rio triplets. When we talk about the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Convention on Biodiversity, and the Convention on how to combat desertification. We refer to all those as the Rio triplets. These were conventions signed to be able to combat this. So in summary, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change sets the standard and wants nations to take actions, positive actions, that are aimed at reducing the temperature from going, haywire. You see how many people died from heat waves, either in Saudi Arabia or Europe. And these are the outcomes of climate change. So the global agenda is control these things. Let all hands be on deck. And what nations use to control, what nations are expected to use to be able to contribute together to achieve this, is what we call nationally determined contributions. What contribution are you going to make? You set a level. What you think you can make, on your own, voluntarily, and the other ones that is dependent on maybe the help that you get. For instance, in Nigeria accepted to do 20% unconditional, that they'll be able to contribute that. And I think we have even gone past that through the removal of fuel subsidy. And then the other 47% is if we get support from international organizations, donor agencies, to help us to be able to move. When we set it the first time, I think we set it at 45, but we've now gone to 47, which means we have made progress because we are taking actions by ourselves. Then on the other hand, the Nigerian government has also been able to enact a climate change act, which by the grace of God I sponsored when I was in Parliament. To be able to lay down, rules, let them be clear. This is what the state is supposed to do. This is what the nation is supposed to do. And then allow the subnationals to be able to get involved. Because you agree with me, yes, this is Abuja. Climate change activities are not so strong here, apart from what is coming from transportation and the use of energy. So it's not so strong, But where you see activities going on very much is in the rural areas. Where people go to fell trees and they engage in activities that lead to erosion and all that. So the Nigerian government has taken this action to have the Climate Change Act, which, of course, the Nigerian government also expects the subnationals, particularly the states, to be able to domesticate and then have their own climate change governance plans to be able to fit in. And overall, together, we'll be able to achieve the goals set in these laws.
All right. Yes, Honorable. Haven't you've laid down some of the global agenda? So how is Nigeria affected by this global agenda that you've laid down?
Nigeria is affected in very many ways. I mean, climate change, like I would always tell them, is borderless. When you talk about pollution, when it gets into the air, nobody knows whether it's going to Rivers State or it's going to Cameroon, it's going to Kaduna, or it's crossing over the Atlantic. So Nigeria is affected. And therefore, because Nigeria is affected, Nigeria keys into global decisions, global actions, so that they are also contributing. But on the impact of climate change, you of course have seen, like I narrated before, maybe we just take the issue of erosion. I come from the southeast. I know the areas where we used to go to pick snails in those days, and there was no serious erosion. But those areas, you cannot enter them today because they've been badly eroded as a result of the impact of climate change. And if you go up north, you will then find that areas that used to be green, where people were grazing their cattle and all that, all those areas have dried up. Some of them have turned to dust. And as a result, you see people now looking for areas where they can find means of livelihood to be able to survive. So if you talk of Nigeria keying into the global agenda, yes, Nigeria is keying into that in terms of laws and actions, participation in something like the Climate Change Conference that is coming up in November, at Belém, Brazil, what we call Conference of Parties, number 30. So Nigeria participates, Nigeria takes action, Nigeria tries to make sure that it demonstrates clearly that it's a responsible, nation, by its actions. Then at the local level, with this impact that we have talked about, the government, both at the federal and the state now, they are all working to see how they can make the place better. Because while we are talking about, while we have Ministry of Women Affairs as one of the ministries to sit on the Climate Change Council, is because people understand that women are significantly affected by the impact of climate change. You see women carrying babies on the back in search of water, miles away from where they are living. Why? Because the impact of climate change has dried up the place where they used to go and get water easily. For instance, I come from a village in Obuoyi, in Ikwa, Abia State. When I was, attending primary school, we had 6 springs that were rushing. You would take your calabash and rush to it and put it, and then you fetch it and come. But by the time I finished from higher institution, did my youth service, and just walked a little bit and came back to the village, 5 out of those 6 springs had dried up. and it was at the impact of climate change. So what that means now is that women and children, they will find it very difficult to go and get water. You now have to do miles to be able to get water. It is something up north, it's something in different parts of the country. So that's why nations are working. You need clean water, you need access to electricity, you need a conducive atmosphere to be able to live a normal life.
How do we get the subnationals involved into facing these challenges of climate change?
Well, the way
starting from the federal government.
Yeah, no, the federal government, like I said, has enacted an act, the Climate Change Act.
Is it enough?
Only 2021? No, that's a starting point.
Okay.
Perhaps because of the question you asked whether it is enough, I'll tell you that it took the 6th Assembly to start this law. It failed. The 7th Assembly started it, worked on it. It failed. The 8th Assembly, when I first sponsored it, tried it, and it failed. It was only in the 9th Assembly that I resubmitted or, processed the bill for discussion, debate, and then they went through all the processes and was eventually assented to by late President Muhammadu Buhari. So when you say, is it enough? You have to start from somewhere. And having started so, then you go to states like Lagos, Cross River, Ondo, and all the rest of them. They're all doing their own. So you have to set the table, set the target, and then work with the subnationals. Like I said, you can stay in the villa, but the villa is not where they're felling trees and then, doing illegal mines, and doing other things that help or that contribute to change in climate. The villa is neat. The Voice of Nigeria is neat. But we also have to know that these activities are more in the subnationals, particularly at the local government level. So they must come along, participate. Then we see the climate governance, framework of the states, and make sure that the states now use the local governments to achieve these things. So these are things that I know that are being done across the country.
There has been ongoing debate that climate change has direct relationship with insecurity and poverty and all that. How true is this statement? And if it is true, what is the government doing, to reduce the impact on the lives of Nigerians?
Oh, well, yeah, it's not even an ordinary debate. That was debated and adopted at the United Nations General Assembly. 261, that's a resolution, of the General Assembly. That's to decide that, they agreed that, there's a relationship, there's a connection between climate change, the effects, negative impacts of climate change, and insecurity. And I'll probably explain that a little bit for you. If you go up north now, the Sahel deserts, Sahara Desert and all that, the impact of climate change has cleared those areas and made them uninhabitable. And what has resulted from it is that you have, ungoverned spaces that have been taken over by bandits and insurgents, and where they now do their training and come down to disturb normal people. It was probably because of this that the African Union, as far back as 2005 to 2007, resolved to set up the Great Green Wall. And that Great Green Wall runs from a place like Senegal down to Djibouti, cutting across the entire African spread, because they realized that the impact of climate change was going to be very devastating on all these countries that I've just mentioned, of which Nigeria is one. And in this Nigeria, you have 11 states that are directly impacted. And those states are in the northwest and in the northeast. So that's why we have also the National Great Green Wall of Nigeria. Okay. So these, for a start, points to the fact that yes, there is danger that's coming from climate change. The United Nations Security Council on their own came around here in 2017, paid attention, studied the impact of climate change around the Sahel, the northern part of the country, northeast and all that, and they were also able to come up with their own report. So there's no doubt at all that climate change, the devastating effects of climate change, can change everything around. For instance, an environment where you are farming normally and you harvest, but suddenly the impact of climate change has turned it to dust, and you have children to feed, you have a family to take care of, you are most likely going to move. That is what we call forced migration. You are forced by circumstances, by where you are staying, to go in search of where to earn livelihood with your family. Then how does that lead to insecurity? Where you are moving from your place to where someone is already operating, you are definitely going to experience some clash, some conflict. And at the local level, it can be contained. But when it goes beyond that, that is part of what we are seeing now, where some people are moving from the area where they once were able to find means of livelihood down to areas where they know they can survive, and they have to use some force. So what comes out of it is a clash, and if it is not handled properly, it gets out of way. So that's the insecurity relating climate change.
We'll end this discussion after touching the philosophy of this present administration that borders on Renew Hope Agenda. Renew Hope Agenda, Nigeria 65 at the middle. Anything that this administration has done new, especially in the area of addressing the challenges of climate change.
Oh yeah, absolutely. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu GCFR has clearly demonstrated that he came prepared to provide or exercise leadership. Let me give you instances. In 2023, shortly after he was elected, and shortly after he assumed office, by November, he led a formidable team of his government to attend COP28 in Dubai. And when he was going, if you go there and check his budget speech, because he did his budget speech for 2024 before he came to Dubai, you check paragraph 24, 25, 26 down, you would find that he clearly said that that his administration was going to use climate change, whatever that's going to come out of it in terms of investment, to be able to support the development of the nation. So that's a man who came prepared to exercise leadership in the right form. So you have to credit him with that effort. And he also out there, he was able to enact, or constitute the committee that is on carbon credit. He did it out there in Dubai, where he appointed the Director General of Federal Inland Revenue Services, ZAC, and then the Director General of National Council on Climate Change, which is actually the council that is saddled with the responsibility of ensuring that we're able to achieve our climate change objectives. And that council is a product of the Climate Change Act. It was established by Section 3 of that Act. So he appointed the director, by then Dr. Salisu, to be able to come up with these ideas to fit into Africa's overall plan on this. So, and then this is the president that has also given approval to the Northeast Development Commission to be able to deploy electric vehicles. And he has worked on the issue of renewable energy, allowing, of course, you saw the vice president out at the UN talking to organizations to come and invest, so as to take advantage of the Nigerian population of over 200 million people, 230 or so million people. And I would always like to talk about what we did, when we privatized our telecommunications industry, where the world out there thought it was a joke, but eventually companies that came and joined us in trying to privatize, when we moved to telecommunication, mobile phones and other, those companies benefited. And it is the same invitation that we are extending to other people to take advantage of this bubbly nation. Wonderful people, energetic youths, bubbling to go, very well educated, to key into this renewable energy, project and benefit from it. So Mr. President has done absolutely well, and he has continued to encourage and to move in this direction. And I think that he's not going to remove his foot is not going to move away from the throttle until he parks the car on positive, remarkable development of Nigeria through different facets of the economy.
Right Honorable Sam Onuigbo, thank you for reacting positively to some of the challenges and prospects that Nigeria and global world will experience in the climate change as we mark our 65 years of independence. I know that if we call you some other time that you will be here to react to some of the questions, apart from climate change and other issues. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed for having me.